Okay, for this next part of our project, we are going to be using the element of value. So if we think back to what we learned in the beginning of the year about the 7 elements of art, we learned that value is one of them. And value is how light or dark something is. So when we look at our shape drawing that we made, we're going to find areas where we can include different values. So if we look at this picture that I have here, this is an example of a value scale. And a value scale always shows what the color or the shade looks like from dark to light. So if you look at my green color that I did here, at the top is my darkest value. This would be considered my shadow or my shade. This is as dark as my green can go, and that's at the top of my scale. As it moves away, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter until it gets down here at the bottom of my scale where it's so light, it's almost white down here at the bottom. Same thing with my pencil. This was as hard as I can go with my pencil. It's my darkest shade, and then as it moves away towards the other side, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter until I have my lightest shade here at the bottom. At about halfway, this has a special name. This is called the mid-tone. And it's a middle tone in between your darkest and your lightest values. So if you look here, this should always be about in the middle of what you see here and here. So that's the mid-tone. So we have the shadow, the mid-tone, and then this down here where the white is called the highlight. Okay, so dark, medium, light, shadow, mid-tone, highlight. On our shape drawing, we're going to use shadows and mid-tones and highlights, all those different values, to fill in our shapes. So if we think back to when we created this drawing, we used all geometric shapes and we overlapped them. So where these shapes overlap, I now have a new shape. So if we look in here at this piece where my triangle is intersecting my circle, I have this new shape here that looks kind of like a piece of pizza, right? It has that little piece that comes out of it. But this is a new shape. So even though it doesn't have a name for it, there's no name for this shape, it still fits the definition of a shape. So a shape is any enclosed line. So where a line ends creates a shape. So inside here I now have a new shape. Same for here, and every other area of my drawing. So what I'm going to do is use either a regular pencil or a colored pencil to create different values inside of my shapes, and I'm going to use this video to show you how to do that. And then you're going to choose one or the other. You're going to choose to do yours either in pencil or pick a color from your colored pencils and do that. So first I'm going to show you how you would get different values with just a regular pencil. So what I want to do first is pick an area where I want to fill in first. And I want to do all different values all over my page. Okay, I want to have some areas that are dark, I want to have some areas that are mid-tones in the middle, and I want to have some areas that are really light, like a highlight. So in order to do something dark like a shadow, this is all about pressure. So I press hard with my pencil to get my dark value. So when I fill this in, I'm pressing as hard as I can, you know, not so hard that I'm breaking my pencil point. All right, then we can do no values if we don't have a pencil point. So press as hard as you can to get that dark value. Okay, and this is as dark as it will go. That makes my shadow value my deepest, darkest value. Okay, and that I picked for that area. I will want to do this value in more areas of my drawing. So while I'm on this one, maybe I'll move to another shape and I'll do that same value. So I want to spread these out around my page. I want to move around my page as I go. Remember this dark one, I'm just pressing as hard as I can, and I'm finding other areas of my drawing. I'm moving around. I'm doing them all over. And I'm pressing down as hard as I possibly can for these ones. And those are my shadows, my deepest, darkest values. Okay? Once I have a good amount of those on my page, I want to move on to another value. So maybe I want to go a little bit lighter than this, right? So if I'm using a value that's a little bit lighter than this, the trick is to just press a little less with my pencil. Okay, so this might be the same pressure that you use to regularly color something in, or when you write on paper. So it's not a lot of pressure, but it's still dark enough to see it really well. So this is about a shade lighter than my shadow. And I would do the same thing. I move around my page and I fill in those new shapes that I've created by overlapping. So the only difference from that first one that I did was this is just slightly lighter. It's a lighter value on my value scale. And for this project, you will have quite a bit of time. It takes a while. So if you need to, stop and give yourself a break, it's a lot to fill in. You'll have many days to do this, so don't feel like you have to get it all done in one shot. So you want to take your time and just try to fill in your areas as best as you can. But just pace yourself. So if it feels like you're getting tired and it's maybe starting to look sloppy, take a break. That way you can make sure it stays nice and neat and you can give it your full focus and full attention. Okay, and that's my next value. Okay, as I move down the value scale, I just keep pressing lighter. So if I want something even lighter, and this could be maybe about my mid-tone, my middle tone, now I'm going really light compared to my first one that was super dark. So I'm about in the middle of my value scale, so it's just medium pressure, so a lot lighter than my shadow was. But I can still see a good amount of it. Right. And I would do that again in other areas. If I want something that's closest to my highlight down this end of my value scale, I press really lightly. So for this, my pencil would like barely touch my page to get something really light. And for some of these on this video, you might even have a hard time seeing it on the camera, but you'll be able to see it on your paper well when you go to do it, when you do those light values. So you want to keep doing that until eventually you have your page filled with all of those different values. So this is kind of what it would look like in pencil. If you're doing colored pencil, you want to choose just one color. So we're doing different values and you're choosing one color. Pretty much every color is okay except for yellow. You don't want to use yellow because yellow is already really light. It's hard to get a darker shade that's dark enough to show up with a yellow, but any other color would be okay. I'm just going to use a blue for this example, but it's the same idea as what I showed you with the graphite pencil. So you want to create a value scale, so start with your darker values. These are ones that you press down hard. Okay, so remember you use your pressure to adjust your values. So darker values you push down harder, lighter values you push down less. Use less pressure. Okay, and I'm moving about my page to do those different darker values, which are my shadows. Remember they're closer to black on the value scale. As I move away, it gets closer to white on the value scale, so it gets much lighter. I want to spread out my darker values all over my page so you'll have a much bigger space to think about when you go to do yours. I'm going to make sure you spread them out pretty even. So try to make sure each little section of your page, if you think about it in quarters, in 4 parts, each quarter should have about the same amount of dark spots, dark shadows on there. And then as I move down my value scale, as I do the next value, like what I see here, I ease up. I don't press as hard. So I'm still putting a good amount of pressure on there, like if I was normally coloring something in. And you can see it definitely starts to look a bit lighter than my darkest shadow there. But it's still pretty dark. It's still on the dark end of the scale. I want to make sure it's pretty much filled in solid. So I'm careful around my edges when I go in and color it in, taking my time there. Alright, and then you would do the same thing, move about, try to do that value scale everywhere, and then every time you do a lighter value, you put less pressure on there. So if you want something really light, you'll be barely touching the page with your colored pencil to get something really super light. So you want to try to mix these up. You want to try to get some really dark values, some middle values, and then some really soft light values. So your colored pencil or your regular pencil is just, barely whispering to the page when you do those. So it's very, very light. You draw very gently to get those really light values. Okay, so here's an example of the colored one, and here's an example of the pencil one. So eventually your whole page will be filled with those different values.